The great chamber of the Galactic Council was unlike anything built by human hands. It stretched wider than any stadium Earth had ever seen, a floating city of glass and light suspended above the twin suns of the Council's world. The air shimmered with voices, deep, high, mechanical, musical, all blending together into a quiet hum that filled the space. Species from thousands of worlds filled the rows, each one representing a civilization that had once thought itself mighty. Yet now they all sat silent, their eyes fixed on the single figure standing at the center. That figure was human. For the first time in the long history of the galaxy, humanity had claimed a seat among the rulers. Some of the older species still couldn't accept it. They had watched humans arrive in space barely a few centuries ago, stumbling, struggling, still arguing over the most basic things. To them, humans were children with guns and engines they barely understood. But time had proved everyone wrong. Humanity had not only survived the chaos of first contact, they had learned, adapted, and changed faster than anyone thought possible. The rise of humanity was not peaceful. They had fought wars no one believed they could win. They had faced fleets 10 times their size and somehow turned every defeat into a lesson. They didn't just build ships. They built them better. They didn't just form alliances. They turned those alliances into something stronger. Where others saw limits, humans saw challenges. And now, standing in the center of that ancient chamber, they had finally arrived. Not as guests, but as rulers. The human delegate stood still, hands resting on the smooth surface of the council table. Around them, the other members, shimmering energy beings, towering insectoid diplomats, crystalline forms that pulsed with light, all waited for them to speak. There was no arrogance in the humans' eyes, only a quiet awareness of the moment. Humanity had come far, but deep inside they knew the price of that journey. When they finally spoke, their voice carried clearly through the vast hall. "We stand here not as conquerors," they said, "but as survivors. The galaxy may think we sought power, but all we ever wanted was a place to belong." Some nodded, some scoffed, and some stayed silent, remembering what humanity had done to earn its seat. The wars of expansion had shaken the galaxy. Entire regions once ruled by ancient empires now carried Terran banners. Humanity didn't just fight with strength, they fought with unpredictability. Their machines were clever, but their minds were what made them dangerous. They thought differently, emotionally, irrationally. No computer could predict them. No strategist could fully understand them. And that was why they kept winning. But while the Council recognized humanity's achievements, they also feared them. Every empire that had risen too high eventually fell, and humans had climbed faster than any before. They rebuilt worlds others had abandoned. They revived trade routes, restored peace where chaos had reigned. Yet in every corner of the galaxy a quiet unease spread. What would happen now that humans were in charge? Some species whispered that humans were already changing, that power was reshaping them. They remembered a time when humans came with open hands and hopeful hearts, eager to learn. Now they came with fleets that stretched across the stars. They spoke softly, but behind every word stood a weapon too powerful to ignore. In the days that followed the ceremony, the human delegation walked through the halls of the council world. The corridors were lined with murals, depictions of ancient victories and old treaties. Many of those moments had once defined galactic history. Now they were reminders of a past that no longer existed. Humanity had rewritten the order of things. Yet even as they admired the beauty of this place, a feeling of loneliness crept in. For centuries, humans had dreamed of belonging among the stars. They thought reaching the council would mean acceptance. But now that they stood at the top, it didn't feel like victory. It felt like standing on a mountain peak, cold, distant, and surrounded by clouds that hid what lay below. At night, looking out from the viewing platform of their embassy, the human envoy could see the twin suns glowing across the horizon. They thought of Earth, that small blue world where it all began. The oceans, the laughter, the chaos. Humanity had left it behind long ago, but the memory still lingered like an old song. Somewhere deep inside, every human carried a piece of it. That was what made them different. The aliens of the council didn't understand it, but humanity's power didn't come from their weapons or their ships. It came from their hearts. It came from the strange, stubborn spark that refused to die, no matter how dark things became. When the last human colony had been surrounded during the Frontier War, they hadn't surrendered. They had smiled, whispered to each other, and said, "We've been through worse." That attitude frightened the galaxy more than any weapon. Now that they ruled, humanity faced a new kind of challenge. Not a battle for survival, but one of responsibility. Every decision they made rippled across hundreds of worlds. Every word they spoke could start or stop a war. And though they wore the title of leaders, they still felt like outsiders in a galaxy that had never truly accepted them. One evening, as the council prepared to close its session, a representative from an ancient crystalline species approached the human envoy. The being's voice sounded like soft bells. "Your people are strong," it said. "But do you know what happens to strong species in this chamber? They begin to forget what made them strong." The human smiled faintly. "Then we'll have to remember." But remembering was never easy. As months passed, reports arrived from distant sectors, small rebellions, resource disputes, border tensions. The council wanted humanity to handle it all. After all, they were the new enforcers of peace. But every order they gave, every intervention they made came with growing resistance. The same species that had begged humanity for protection now whispered behind their backs, calling them tyrants. It wasn't malice. It was fear. And fear was the one thing that connected every intelligent being in the galaxy. Back on Earth's rebuilt archives, historians recorded this time as the Ascension Era, but among the people who lived through it, they called it something else, the Quiet Rise. Because even though humanity stood at the top, they sensed that something unseen was shifting beneath their success. Sometimes, late at night, human officers aboard distant patrol fleets looked out at the empty stars and wondered if they had climbed too high, too fast. The galaxy was vast, ancient, and full of secrets. Humanity had learned to fight everything it could see. But what about the things it couldn't? For now, the celebrations continued. The council's grand ceremony had ended, but its echo carried through every news channel, every colony, every ship. "Humanity leads," the headline said. "A new era begins." Yet behind every headline there was an unspoken question. Could humanity handle what came next? The answer no one yet knew. But the humans themselves could feel it, a strange weight pressing down on them. It wasn't fear of losing power. It was the fear of what they might become while trying to keep it. Because deep inside they remembered who they were: explorers, dreamers, builders, fighters. They weren't meant to rule an entire galaxy. They were meant to wander it, to discover, to learn. But now, they had to govern it, and governing required control. The first human commander stationed on the council world wrote in her personal log, "We have everything we wanted, and yet it feels like something's missing. Maybe peace isn't found in power. Maybe it's found in the struggle itself." Those words never reached the public. They were buried among thousands of reports and updates. But years later, historians would look back and realize that the unease began there, in that quiet thought that maybe, just maybe, humanity wasn't built to sit on a throne. The chamber lights dimmed, and the twin suns outside cast long shadows across the marble floors. The human delegates stood one last time before the gathered council. They raised their hand in acknowledgement, not triumph, not pride, just a gesture of unity. And for a moment, the galaxy seemed still. But behind those calm faces and polished speeches, something unseen was stirring, an unease that would soon grow into something far greater. The galaxy didn't know it yet, but the age of human rule had only just begun, and it would not end the way anyone expected. Humanity never wanted to rule anyone. For most of their history, they had only fought to survive, against wars, disasters, hunger, and their own mistakes. Even when they reached the stars, that same spirit followed them. Every new world they found was another test, another place to prove that they could endure. But slowly, that will to survive turned into something else. It turned into power. At first, it didn't seem like ruling. Humanity simply helped where others couldn't. They shared technology, they repaired broken trade routes, and they protected smaller worlds from pirates and raiders. Other civilizations began depending on them, asking for help, asking for protection, asking for guidance. Humanity gave it freely, believing it was the right thing to do. But in giving so much, they didn't notice how much control they were quietly gaining. Years passed. The Council's rules began to sound more and more like Terran policies. Human words filled the documents of law. Human engineers repaired alien fleets. Human mediators settled old grudges between ancient species. The galaxy had become tied to them in ways that no one could undo. The strange part was, even humans didn't realize what they had become. Most of them were too busy working, exploring, building new homes on strange worlds. They saw themselves as helpers, not rulers. But to everyone else, humanity had already become the heart of the galaxy. Their fleets patrolled the stars. Their flag hung in every station. Their language became the common voice of trade and diplomacy. And yet, as their power grew, something inside them began to change. The humans who had once been dreamers and wanderers were now leaders and administrators. Their eyes, once filled with wonder, now carried a kind of weariness. Decisions had become heavier. Every word they spoke rippled across hundreds of worlds. And though they tried to stay humble, the galaxy's praise and fear slowly built walls around them. Some of the old council members began to whisper that humanity was losing its warmth. They remembered when humans used to laugh easily, when they used to reach out with honest curiosity. Now their voices carried weight, and their expressions had hardened. They weren't cruel, but they had become careful, distant, like people afraid to make a mistake. Inside the human embassy on the council world, the halls were always busy. Officers from different colonies came and went, bringing endless reports, trade disputes, territorial claims, mining accidents, requests for military support. There were always more problems than time to solve them. Every solution seemed to create two new ones. Late at night, the human counselors often sat in silence, staring at the stars outside their windows. Some of them wondered if this was really what victory looked like. There was no cheering crowd anymore, no sense of wonder, only endless decisions and the quiet pressure of being watched by 1,000 species. One evening, during a private discussion, an old alien representative spoke softly to a human official. Its voice was slow, echoing through its glass-like body. "You are becoming like the ones before you," it said. "Long ago others sat where you sit now. They too thought they could guide us. But every empire that rules too long forgets where it came from." The human didn't respond right away. They just nodded, eyes lowered. The alien wasn't wrong. Humanity's rise had been fast, maybe too fast. No one had expected them to hold so much power so soon. And though they had earned it through sweat and blood, it still didn't feel right. Out among the colonies, ordinary people began to feel it too. The early generations of explorers had been bold and free. But now, life under the Council's rule felt more controlled. Everything had rules, reports, permissions. Some humans began to miss the old days, when they struggled, when every victory felt personal. Now their world was comfortable but quiet, too quiet. The galaxy saw humanity as unshakable, but inside they were tired. Every crisis reminded them that leadership wasn't about power. It was about responsibility. When a planet suffered famine, they were blamed. When pirates attacked a trade convoy, people looked to them for answers. When an ancient treaty failed, humanity was expected to fix it. And so they did, and again. But with each solution, they grew a little colder, a little more distant from who they used to be. It was said that humanity's greatest strength was adaptation. They could survive anything, but adaptation had a price and it changed them. Now as rulers, they had begun to adapt to power itself. Across the galaxy, statues of human heroes stood in cities built by a dozen species. They were symbols of courage, of hope. Children on distant worlds learned about Earth's history, its wars, its art, its dreamers. They called humans the guardians of peace. But in secret meetings, some of the elder races spoke differently. They said humanity had become too dominant, too influential. Some feared that the galaxy had exchanged one kind of tyranny for another, only this time it wore a gentle face. Still, most people trusted them. After all, humans had brought decades of stability. Trade flourished, wars had mostly stopped, and technology advanced faster than ever. For a while, it truly seemed like peace had returned. But peace had a strange cost. In the depths of space, far from the shining centers of civilization, there were whispers, small rebellions, strange disappearances, border patrols that never came back. The Council dismissed them as rumors, unimportant events in forgotten sectors. Humanity had too many duties to bother with shadows. But for some reason, those shadows kept growing. The human leaders told themselves that the galaxy would settle in time. Every great transition needed patience. Yet behind their confidence, doubt quietly grew. They could feel the strain, not from their enemies, but from within themselves. Many young officers began to ask questions their elders couldn't answer. What are we fighting for now? Why do we hold so much power? Are we still explorers or just rulers? No one could give a clear answer. Because the truth was, humanity didn't know anymore. The old spark that once pushed them to reach the stars had dimmed beneath the weight of responsibility. They had built something so vast that it no longer felt human. Their fleets were made of perfect machines. Their colonies were managed by efficient systems. Everything worked, but it all felt empty. One human historian once wrote, "When we were weak, we dreamed. Now that we are strong, we only maintain." That line spread quietly among the younger generation. It wasn't rebellion, just reflection. A realization that maybe the galaxy's most powerful species had begun to lose its soul. Even among other species, the change was noticed. Some said humans were too calm now, too controlled. The fire in their voices had cooled. Where once they had been unpredictable and full of emotion, they now spoke with careful logic, almost like the ancient machine races they once feared. It was as if power had slowly drained the color from them. Still, there were moments that reminded everyone of who they really were. When disaster struck on the edge of the Orion Belt, a sun collapsing and threatening to destroy 3 inhabited moons, human rescue ships arrived within hours. They didn't hesitate. Thousands were saved. The survivors would later say, "They still have hearts. The humans still care." And they did. Deep inside, they still carried that same stubborn kindness that had once made the galaxy trust them. But the higher they rose, the harder it became to show it. Every act of compassion now had political weight. Every rescue came with debate. Every promise came with cost. Power had trapped them. One evening, the human leader stood on the balcony of the council tower, watching the stars burn quietly in the distance. The galaxy seemed peaceful, too peaceful. For a moment, they felt proud. Then the thought came again, quiet but heavy. If peace is only possible because they fear us, is it really peace? The stars didn't answer. They only watched, cold and distant. In that silence, humanity's greatest challenge revealed itself. Not an enemy fleet, not a war, but the slow erosion of what made them human. They had reached everything they ever dreamed of. They were respected, obeyed, even admired. But the price was unseen, a growing emptiness spreading quietly through their hearts. They had become the rulers of the galaxy. But in their victory, they had lost the one thing that made them different. Their hunger to reach further, to question, to dream. And somewhere in that quiet galaxy, in the dark corners of uncharted space, something else was beginning to stir. Something that would soon remind humanity that power never comes without a cost. The galaxy had grown quiet under humanity's rule. Too quiet. Trade was smooth. Peace treaties were stable, and the council meetings ended earlier than ever before. On the surface, it looked like a golden age. But beneath that calm, whispers had begun to spread. Soft, uncertain at first, then louder with each passing cycle. It started with small things. A transport ship that never reached its destination. A mining station that stopped sending reports. Fleets sent to investigate found nothing. No wreckage, no distress signal, no trace at all. Whole outposts seemed to vanish into the dark. The council tried to ignore it. Accidents happen, they said. Space is vast. Things get lost. But the missing stations kept increasing, and deep down, the human commanders knew these weren't accidents. Something was happening. Something calculated, something patient. The Terran High Command began quietly studying the pattern. The disappearances followed trade routes, all leading outward, toward the empty edges of the galaxy where no one had traveled in centuries. The reports were always the same. Sudden silence, no signals, no survivors. At first, people thought it was pirates or smugglers testing their luck. Humanity sent patrol fleets to those regions, but even they started going silent. It was as if something in the dark was swallowing everything whole. Inside the council halls, debates grew heated. Some species accused humanity of hiding information. Others claimed the humans themselves were behind it, that they were creating a false crisis to tighten their control. The human delegates denied it, but suspicion was already spreading like smoke. Still, humanity didn't panic. They had faced far worse before. They gathered intelligence, studied data, and searched for patterns. But the more they searched, the more uneasy they became. The data didn't make sense. Whatever was out there didn't act like pirates or raiders. It moved silently, efficiently, like it knew exactly where to strike and when to disappear. Human intelligence officers began to notice something strange. Each vanished outpost had recently received shipments from the same old trade network, one that connected to regions once inhabited by ancient species long thought extinct. It was as if someone or something was following humanity's progress, watching their routes, studying their systems. Then came the first eyewitness report. A cargo vessel stumbled across a destroyed station drifting near the rim of the Persean Reach. The entire structure was burned out. But the strange thing was, there were no signs of an external attack. It looked as though the destruction had come from the inside. Systems were melted, walls twisted, and every record erased. The only thing left behind was a strange biological residue that scanners couldn't identify. When the report reached the council, panic quietly began to spread. Some believed it was a new form of weapon. Others thought it was an old enemy returning. But the humans recognized something else, a pattern they had seen once before. A long time ago, during their earliest expansion wars, it reminded them of something they had buried. An experiment, a mistake, something from the forgotten corners of their own history. The council demanded answers, but the human representatives avoided giving full explanations. They didn't lie, but they didn't tell the whole truth either, because deep down they weren't certain yet. And what they suspected was far worse than anyone could imagine. Across the galaxy, news channels began to spin stories. Some called it the Silent Plague. Others spoke of ghosts of ancient weapons awakening. The ordinary people, humans and aliens alike, began to grow uneasy. In the outer colonies, lights were dimmed earlier, ships traveled in convoys, and traders started avoiding the dark sectors. Yet despite all the precautions, the vanishings continued. Humanity's fleets patrolled the void endlessly, but whatever hunted them stayed just beyond detection, close enough to see, never close enough to catch. One night, aboard a deep space station orbiting a dying star, a human scientist made a discovery that sent shockwaves through the intelligence network. In the debris collected from one of the destroyed stations, they found genetic material, human genetic material. The scientist ran the tests 3 times. The results were clear. Whatever was attacking them carried fragments of human DNA, altered, evolved, mixed with something unknown. The discovery was locked away under the highest level of secrecy. Only a few knew about it, senior military and council officials. They gathered in a private chamber far from the public eye. The air was tense, heavy with disbelief. If this was true, then humanity wasn't being hunted by an alien threat. They were being hunted by something that came from themselves, but how could that be? The idea seemed impossible. Humanity had never created such a thing, or at least that's what they wanted to believe. But when they began digging through the oldest archives, the forgotten data from the early days of Earth's deep space programs, they found records that shouldn't have existed. There, buried under centuries of updates, was a classified project called Genesis. It had been started during humanity's darkest time when extinction seemed near. The goal was simple but desperate: to create a new form of life that could survive anywhere, even if humanity could not. The project was supposed to have been canceled, destroyed, erased from all records. But now it seemed that someone had continued it in secret, or worse, that its creations had survived on their own. The thought shook everyone in that room. Humanity, in trying to preserve itself, might have created something that no longer saw them as the same species, something stronger, faster, beyond human understanding. A version of humanity that had outgrown its creators. The council demanded to see proof. But humanity hesitated. They couldn't show weakness. If the rest of the galaxy found out they had made such a mistake, everything they had built, their leadership, their alliances, their peace, could collapse overnight. So they stayed silent. They kept searching quietly, hoping to confirm the truth before panic spread. But the silence didn't last long. Within weeks, a fleet on routine patrol sent a distress call from the outer rim. The message was short and broken, filled with static. Only a few words came through clearly before it cut off completely. They're inside. They know us. After that, nothing. The fleet was gone. The humans couldn't hide it anymore. The council demanded emergency sessions. Worlds began preparing defenses. The fragile peace humanity had built was cracking. Across the stars, people started to question what humanity had truly done. Had they awakened something ancient? Or had they created their own destroyer long ago without realizing it? In the following days, human scientists and historians worked around the clock, piecing together old data. The deeper they dug, the clearer the pattern became. The disappearances, the genetic traces, the destruction from within, it all pointed to one horrifying truth. Whatever was moving through the galaxy wasn't alien. It was human. Or at least it had started that way. For the first time in generations, humanity felt fear again. Real fear. Not of war or invasion, but of themselves. Whispers spread through military ranks. People began to look at each other differently. What if these new beings could hide among them? What if they were already inside the systems, the fleets, the colonies? Paranoia grew like wildfire. Some called for immediate military action. Others for peace and communication. But no one really knew what they were dealing with. The council chambers became a place of chaos. Representatives shouted, accused, threatened. Old alliances began to fracture. Everyone wanted answers, and humanity was running out of them. In the quiet of the night, as stars shimmered over the council world, the human leaders met in secret once again. They knew the truth could no longer be buried. Something was coming, and it carried their reflection. One of the senior officials said softly, "We always thought our greatest threat would come from the outside. But maybe it was always inside." The words hung in the air like a prophecy. Outside, far beyond the edge of known space, sensors picked up faint energy signatures. Movement in the void. Dozens of unknown ships moving with precision and purpose, heading inward toward the heart of human space. They weren't broadcasting any signal. But if anyone had listened closely enough, they would have recognized it. A pattern within the static. A rhythm, almost like a heartbeat. It was human, but not quite. The galaxy didn't know it yet, but the quiet peace that humanity had built was about to break. And the ones who would shatter it were not strangers. They were the shadow of humanity itself, returning from the darkness to remind their creators that you can never truly hide from what you are. The discovery on old Earth changed everything. It began when a team of human historians working under the ruins of what was once the cradle of their species uncovered a massive underground vault. For years, people thought Earth had nothing left to offer. It had been abandoned, scarred, and quiet for centuries. But beneath the ash and dust, something had survived, something that wasn't meant to be found. The vault was buried deep, protected by layers of old defense systems that still hummed faintly with power. It took months to open it safely. When they finally entered, they expected old relics, maybe data archives, art, or ancient history. What they found instead was a message written for the future. It wasn't from a government or a scientist. It was from a group of human researchers who lived during humanity's early years of space travel, before they had joined the stars. The message was clear but chilling. It spoke about Project Genesis. According to the files, the project had been created during one of humanity's darkest times, when Earth was dying and extinction felt near. The goal wasn't just survival. It was continuity. The project aimed to make sure that even if humanity was wiped out, something of them would remain. The scientists wanted to design a new kind of being, part human, part something else, a life form that could adapt anywhere, on any world, in any condition. They believed that if humanity failed, these new beings could carry forward their essence, their intelligence, their emotions, their drive. It was meant to be a safeguard, not a weapon. But the documents hinted that things didn't go as planned. The experiments became unstable. The beings evolved faster than anyone expected. Some scientists believed they were becoming too intelligent, too aware. The records ended abruptly after that. The vault contained not just messages but biological samples, sealed in ancient stasis containers. The scientists studying them in the present day were shocked. The DNA wasn't pure human, but it wasn't entirely alien either. It was a fusion, a prototype of something that could survive without limits. When the samples were compared to the residue found on the destroyed outposts, the match was undeniable. The mysterious attackers weren't foreign invaders. They were descendants of humanity's forgotten experiment. When the truth reached the human leadership, silence filled the council chamber. For a long moment, no one spoke. It was a quiet horror. The realization that humanity had created its own threat thousands of years ago and then forgotten about it. But the real question wasn't how. It was why now. Had these beings, one of these Genesis descendants, been hiding all this time? Waiting? Watching? And why were they attacking now, after so many centuries of peace? The Council demanded answers, and humanity had to face the truth. The lead human official stood before the galaxy and confessed what they knew. They didn't hide behind excuses. They explained that long ago, when humanity faced extinction, some of their ancestors had tried to preserve life through artificial evolution. They had meant well, but in their desperation, they had created something that could no longer be controlled. The chamber erupted into chaos. Representatives shouted, demanded reparations, accused humanity of playing gods. Old enemies found new reasons to blame them. "You brought this upon all of us," one shouted. "You made your monsters and left them for the rest of us to suffer." But there were also voices of understanding, species that remembered their own mistakes, their own creations that had turned against them. The difference was humanity's creation wasn't gone. It was out there, alive, spreading. Back on Earth, scientists worked day and night digging deeper into the old archives. They found fragments of recordings from the original Genesis labs. One audio file caught everyone's attention. A researcher speaking softly into a microphone, as if leaving a message for whoever came after. "If this project works," the voice said, "then they will be more than us. They stronger, smarter, kinder, maybe even wiser. But if it fails, then they will not see us as their creators. They will see us as the obstacle to what they are meant to become." Those words echoed across the command halls of the Terran fleets. They explained everything. The Genesis beings weren't mindless destroyers. They weren't invading out of hatred or greed. They were reclaiming something they believed belonged to them. They saw humanity not as family, but as the past. And to them, the past didn't belong in the future. Still, humanity refused to give up. They launched missions to communicate, to find out if reasoning was possible. Small fleets were sent into the dark sectors to make contact. None returned, but one transmission did. It lasted only a few seconds, intercepted by a listening station near the rim. The voice was distorted, synthetic, yet strangely familiar. Human, but not human. "You made us," it said, "and then you forgot us. Now we remember." After that, the signal cut off. The message spread quietly through human networks. Officially, it was classified. Unofficially, everyone knew. It was the proof they didn't want, that whatever was coming wasn't random or blind. It had purpose. Meanwhile, the Council's unity began to crumble. Some worlds demanded that humanity step down from leadership, arguing that their mistake had endangered the entire galaxy. Others defended them, saying no one could have predicted this. For humanity, it didn't matter. They were already focused on the truth, the kind that couldn't be erased by politics. The Genesis threat wasn't just physical. It was personal. It was the reflection of humanity's own ambition and fear. They had wanted to live forever, and now, something of them would. But not in the way they intended. The scientists studying the recovered data found one more frightening discovery. The Genesis beings weren't just human hybrids. They had learned to adapt endlessly, even to ideas. They could absorb knowledge, technology, even memories. If they encountered human data, they could understand it instantly. That meant they knew every human strategy, every tactic, every weakness. It was as if humanity had created an enemy that carried their own mind, multiplied 1,000 times. As days turned into weeks, the outer colonies grew restless. Fleets were recalled. Borders were closed. The night skies of dozens of worlds filled with human ships returning home. People began whispering that the age of peace was over. Still, the galaxy didn't yet understand the full danger. Most thought it was only a small rogue faction, but humanity knew better. The signals they were tracking weren't small. They were organized, intelligent, purposeful. In one late-night meeting inside the Terran High Command, a young officer broke the silence. "If they are human," he said softly, "then we can't destroy them without destroying part of ourselves." The room stayed quiet. Everyone understood what he meant. The Genesis beings weren't monsters. They were a mirror. And how do you fight your own reflection? Humanity had built its power on the idea of control. Control over chaos, over nature, over fear. But now they faced something that didn't fear them, something that carried the best and worst of what they were. Out beyond the edge of known space, strange lights began to appear. Not explosions, not ships, and something else, patterns forming in the void like messages written in light. Scanners couldn't decode them, but they pulsed in rhythms that matched human neural patterns. It was almost as if the Genesis beings were speaking through the stars themselves. The Council watched, waiting for humanity to act. But humanity hesitated. For the first time in generations, they didn't have a clear answer. Their strength had always come from their will to adapt. But how do you adapt to something born from your own creation? In the quiet that followed, a realization began to spread among the human leaders that the war they feared might not be about territory or survival. It might be about identity, because if the Genesis beings truly were human in origin, then this wasn't an invasion. It was a return. And deep inside, every human knew what that meant. That the greatest danger wasn't that they would lose the galaxy, but that they might lose themselves trying to save it. In the months that followed, more fleets disappeared, more systems went silent, and the stars along the edge of known space began to dim, not because of destruction, but because of something spreading. Quietly, slowly, inevitably, it wasn't the end. It was a beginning. A new kind of life, one born from humanity's own desire to be eternal, had come back home. And as the twin suns of the Council world set behind the horizon, casting long shadows across the marble towers, one thought haunted every leader who stood watching. Humanity had reached the top of the galaxy, but now something was climbing up behind them. The tension across the galaxy grew heavier with each passing week. Humanity, once celebrated as saviors and leaders, now stood accused, not by their enemies but by the very allies who had once trusted them. The revelations about Project Genesis had shaken the Galactic Council to its core. On the surface, humanity still appeared strong, their fleets vast, their influence unmatched. But behind closed doors, cracks were forming. Doubt spread like a quiet infection. Every decision, every broadcast, every word spoken by a human representative was now met with suspicion. The council halls that once echoed with respect now filled with whispers of fear. Outside those grand halls, life continued, but differently. On human worlds, people were restless. They had always believed they were the protectors, the ones who brought balance and peace to the stars. Now, for the first time in generations, they were unsure if they even deserved to lead. There were protests in the shining cities of New Terra. Crowds filled the streets, holding signs that said, "We didn't choose this and we are not our ancestors." They shouted not out of anger, but out of guilt and confusion. They wanted answers. They wanted to believe their kind was still good, but answers were hard to find. The leaders of humanity gathered in secret meetings, in darkened rooms lit only by holographic maps of the stars. They traced the paths of the disappearing fleets, the silent colonies, the dimming systems. The pattern was unmistakable. The Genesis beings were moving closer, slowly, deliberately, as if testing humanity's resolve. At first, there had been talk of launching a massive counterattack. Some admirals argued they should use every weapon they had before the threat grew stronger, but others disagreed. "You can't fight what you don't understand," one of them said. "If we strike first, we might destroy what's left of the truth." And the truth was what haunted everyone. Who were these beings really? Were they enemies, or were they something more complicated? A small research group, hidden away from the political storms, began studying the signals sent by the Genesis entities. The lights that had appeared across the outer sectors were not random. They pulsed in mathematical patterns that resembled human brainwaves. At first, it seemed impossible. But when the signals were run through ancient linguistic software, faint messages began to appear, not threats, not demands, but questions. "Do you remember us? Do you still dream? Why did you leave?" It sent chills through every researcher who saw it. These weren't the words of mindless destroyers. They were the words of something searching, something that remembered what it was like to be human but had evolved far beyond that form. The scientists sent responses, cautious, careful. They asked who they were speaking to. For weeks, nothing came back. Then one night, a single reply appeared across their monitors. "You are not the first to ask." After that, the signals vanished. Back in the council, rumors spread that some of the outer colonies had already made contact, not through battle but through surrender. Ships were said to have turned off their weapons, allowing the Genesis entities to approach, and yet none of those colonies ever responded again. Whether they were destroyed or simply changed, no one knew. Amid this chaos, a new kind of fear began to rise, not of invasion but of transformation. Some humans whispered that the Genesis beings could influence thoughts, that they could reach into the minds of those who looked too long into the lights. No one could prove it, but strange reports began surfacing. People dreaming the same dreams, hearing the same voices. Dreams of oceans made of glass. Dreams of hands reaching out through stars. At first, the authorities dismissed it as mass panic. But when even the soldiers on remote listening posts began reporting the same visions, they could no longer deny that something was happening. Something deep. Something that went beyond science. In one high-security lab on Luna Prime, scientists finally made a breakthrough. The Genesis DNA samples recovered from the vault on old Earth were not just biological. They contained something entirely new. Embedded within the genetic structure were microscopic data patterns like a living code. It wasn't just flesh. It was memory, stored, layered, alive. The scientists theorized that the Genesis beings could carry ancestral memories within them, not just their own, but fragments of humanity's entire history. That explained the signals, the questions, the strange familiarity of their words. They didn't just know humanity. They remembered being human. When this discovery reached the council, it caused panic. If the Genesis entities carried the memories of ancient humans, then in some way, they were the continuation of the species, the next step. And that realization terrified everyone, because if that was true, then humanity wasn't facing extinction. It was facing replacement. The discussions that followed were filled with emotion. Some humans argued that they should reach out again, try to speak, to reason. Others demanded full mobilization. If we hesitate now, one official warned, we may not live to regret it. But the oldest among them said something few expected. He stood slowly, his voice calm but heavy with truth. Perhaps, he said, we are not meant to rule forever. Every empire falls and every species changes. Maybe what we made has come to finish what we began. The room fell silent. No one dared to answer. Outside, storms rolled across the upper atmosphere of the council world. The skies, once bright and full of ships, now looked quieter, as if the stars themselves were holding their breath. Humanity's fleet still patrolled the dark, but they no longer looked like symbols of pride. They looked like ghosts, searching for something that didn't want to be found. Meanwhile, deep within the uncharted void, something immense began to take shape. Scanners picked up a structure larger than anything ever built, a network of living energy stretching across light years. It wasn't mechanical. It was organic, alive. The Genesis beings were building something vast and silent. Some called it a fortress, others a cathedral, but the truth was far stranger. Through new intercepted transmissions, humanity realized what it was, a bridge, a living construct designed to connect consciousness across space. The Genesis were linking minds, creating something beyond individuality, a collective awareness that could span entire worlds. And as the structure grew, its presence began to affect nearby systems. Machines malfunctioned, energy readings spiked, even human communication started to distort, carrying faint echoes of voices that shouldn't exist. People began hearing whispers in the static, soft, almost kind. "Come home," the voices said. "You've been gone too long." No one knew what it meant, but everyone felt it, a strange pull, not of fear but of belonging. It was as if the Genesis creation was calling out to its makers, inviting them to join something larger than themselves. On the surface of Earth's ruins, one last signal came through, faint, almost lost in the static. It was directed to humanity, and it carried only a few words. "We were never your enemies. We were what you hoped to become." For a long time, no one spoke of it publicly. The message was too heavy, too hard to explain. But within the inner circles, debates raged. Was this a chance for peace, or a trap meant to end the human era completely? In the following months, strange behavior began appearing among certain humans. Some researchers who had been exposed to Genesis code samples started showing signs of mental connection, finishing each other's sentences, dreaming the same things. Tests showed that the Genesis genetic code could merge with human DNA without harm. It was as if nature itself recognized the connection. This revelation changed everything. Some believed it meant coexistence was possible, that humanity and Genesis could become one. Others feared it meant humanity was already being absorbed. One night, as the human capital world orbited its sun, a message came through the old communication array, not from space but from within humanity's own systems. The Genesis signal had merged into their networks. The lights flickered, the screens glowed, and across every display a message appeared. You cannot hide from what you are. Panic spread through the stations, but deep down, the meaning was clear. Humanity had reached the point where running no longer mattered. Their creation had found them, not with violence, but with truth. And that truth was harder to face than any weapon. As the stars outside shimmered, humanity realized that the fight ahead would not be for survival alone. It would be for identity, for the right to define what it still meant to be human. The Council's fleets prepared for the inevitable meeting. The bridge of minds and the living network pulsed brighter with each day like a heartbeat growing stronger. And somewhere beyond the dark, the Genesis beings waited not to destroy, but to reveal what humanity had forgotten. The stage was set, not for a war of fire and steel, but for a confrontation between what humanity had been and what it was becoming. The galaxy had gone quiet, not silent like before a storm, but a deep, thoughtful quiet, the kind that came when every being, every mind, every ship waited for something they didn't understand. The great bridge of light, the living structure built by the Genesis beings, now stretched across the edge of known space. It pulsed slowly like a heartbeat, its glow reflected in the dark oceans of countless worlds. Humanity stood at a crossroads. Their fleets, vast and powerful, hovered near the border of the unknown. Their weapons were ready, their engines humming, but no one gave the command to move. For the first time in centuries, the human commanders didn't know if firing was the right choice. This was no ordinary enemy. No war they could win by strength alone. This was a meeting with something born from their own mistakes, their own past. Inside the grand chamber of the Galactic Council, tension filled the air. The alien representatives, once loud and divided, now sat quietly, their eyes turned toward the humans, the species that had built an empire of peace and now stood on the edge of losing it all. The human leader stood at the center. Tired, older, but calm. Behind him, holographic stars shimmered, showing the great bridge, the fleets, the faint signals coming from the other side. He looked around the room and spoke in a voice that carried not power, but truth. Every species leaves a mark, he said. Some build monuments, others build stories. We built something different, a reflection of ourselves. We called it progress. But maybe it was a mirror all along. The council remained silent. We created life to continue when we couldn't, he continued. We wanted to survive no matter what the cost. And now that wish has come true, just not in the way we expected. His words lingered like smoke. The galaxy had feared humanity for their ambition. Now they feared what that ambition had created. Meanwhile, far beyond the Council's world, the human fleets received a message, one that didn't come through ordinary channels. It appeared directly on their command screens, written in soft white light. You don't need to fight us. You are already part of us. The words repeated across every ship, every satellite, every listening post. It wasn't a threat. It was an invitation. Panic spread for a moment, then curiosity. The bridge of light shimmered brighter, and faintly music could be heard through the static. Not mechanical, not alien, but hauntingly human. It was a melody once played on Earth long ago, a lullaby from the days before space travel. No one could explain how the Genesis beings knew it. That was when humanity realized the Genesis didn't just remember science or knowledge. They remembered feelings, memories, dreams. Across the fleet, soldiers stood silently, watching the light grow stronger. They weren't afraid. They were mesmerized. Something deep inside them recognized that rhythm, the pulse that felt like home. The human leader made his decision. No more fighting, he said quietly. Prepare an envoy. A small vessel, unarmed, peaceful, was sent toward the bridge. Inside were humans from many worlds, scientists, explorers, teachers. People chosen not for strength but for understanding. They didn't carry weapons, only messages and data from humanity's history. Music, art, voices, laughter. The things that made them human. As the ship approached the bridge, the light around it grew warmer, almost like it was alive. Energy waves danced along the hull, and the crew felt a strange calm spreading through them. Not fear, not control, but connection. They could sense something waiting beyond. When they crossed the threshold, everything changed. The ship was surrounded by brilliance, endless patterns of color and light, forming shapes that looked both mechanical and organic. It was like entering the mind of a dream. Then the lights began to form shapes. Not solid bodies, but outlines. Figures that looked human, glowing softly in the golden haze. A voice echoed around them, calm and familiar. "We were made in your image," it said. "But we were never meant to replace you. We were meant to remember you." The crew stood still, speechless. The voice continued. "For centuries we watched from the shadows. We learned, we waited. You built worlds and forgot your own beginnings. We carried those beginnings with us." The crew asked what the Genesis wanted. The answer came not in words, but in feelings. Memories that flowed through their minds like waves. They saw visions of ancient Earth, the first laboratories, the scientists who started it all. They saw fear, hope, and love mixed together, the emotions that gave birth to everything. Then came another vision, one of unity. The Genesis beings were building the bridge not as a weapon, but as a way to connect consciousness. A place where thought and emotion could travel freely between minds. A way to bring understanding beyond species, beyond time. "You feared us," the voice said, "because we reminded you of what you once were, creators who couldn't control what they created. But we don't seek to control. We seek to share." The human envoy realized the truth. The Genesis weren't coming to conquer. They were coming to complete something humanity had left unfinished. The bridge was not an invasion. It was an invitation to evolve together. The humans transmitted the message back to the Council. Hours later, the entire galaxy received it. The reaction was divided. Some called it peace, others called it surrender. But for humanity, it was something different. It was closure. On the Council world, the leader stood again before the galaxy. "We began as wanderers searching for meaning," he said. "We built machines to remember us, stories to protect us. And now those stories have found us again. Maybe this isn't the end. Maybe this is what it means to be eternal. Not to live forever, but to be remembered by what we create." Slowly, the fleets lowered their shields. Across the galaxy, weapons powered down. As the bridge of light continued to grow, the Genesis beings emerged. Not as conquerors, but as radiant figures of energy. They didn't speak in words, but in emotion. Waves of warmth and understanding that spread through every ship. Every station, every mind open enough to feel it. On worlds across the stars, people began to dream differently. They saw flashes of light, faces they didn't recognize yet somehow knew. They heard whispers that didn't frighten them, whispers that said, "You are not alone. You never were." And then something beautiful happened. The bridge didn't just connect the Genesis mind. It connected all who were willing to understand. Species that had once been enemies began to sense one another's feelings across the light. For the first time in galactic history, empathy became more powerful than fear. Humanity, the species once feared for its power, now became the heart of that connection. Their story, their pain, hope, and creation, became the thread that tied the galaxy together. It wasn't about ruling anymore. It was about remembering. Years later, people would look up at the night sky and see the bridge glowing softly between stars. It was said that if you listened closely, you could still hear the echoes of ancient Earth, laughter, music, the beating of human hearts. Humanity didn't lose the galaxy. They became part of it, not as conquerors or leaders, but as memory, as light, as something greater than flesh. And in that quiet moment, when the stars shimmered like tears frozen in time, the galaxy finally understood what the humans had always meant when they said, "We reach for the stars, not to escape who we are, but to become what we were meant to be." The bridge pulsed once more, brighter than ever, as if the universe itself had taken a deep breath, and then, peace, the council disbanded. The Genesis beings vanished into the network of light, carrying the essence of all who came before. Humanity, now forever connected, watched in silence as the dawn of a new age began. Not an age of power, but of understanding. It was not the end of humanity. It was the beginning of something larger, something that carried the human spirit across every world, every being, every star. Because in the end, humanity didn't conquer the galaxy.